And welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. Today, we talk wide receivers we are buying and selling at cost. We tried to pick some that we found difficult to rank and are excited about for you. So stick around for all of that. I'm your host, Justin, joined by JP today. We could not get the three of us together for this one, but we will be getting together for our long form tier episode this week. JP, let's just hop right in. Who is your first wide receiver you are buying or selling?
So my buy is going to be Nico Collins of the Houston Texans. I just think that he has every skill that you want to see in a superstar wide receiver. Justin, you know I love him. He is my boy. At 6'1", 215 pounds, and with an arm length of the 97th percentile at the wide receiver position, he's got that physical ability to outmuscle his DBs for contested catches deep downfield in the red zone. I mean, we saw him make a ton of plays, down the field, making those explosive plays. And you might not think that he's a great athlete. He's shockingly a pretty good athlete. He has a 90th percentile speed score, a 75th percentile burst score as well. So he is a darn good athlete at that size. And what's really impressive this year especially was how well he did as a yak threat. He broke tackles at a really high rate, shockingly. I'm using reception perceptions data. He went down on first contact only 37.1% of the time. So less than half the time he went down on first contact. I mean, he's in elite territory up there. So yeah, that is very, very impressive for a guy. I mean, he's just a load to bring down in the open field. So yeah, he made a lot of plays that way as well. And then the final piece of the puzzle, he shockingly is training to be one of the best route runners. I was pretty impressed with the reception perception data as a route runner. But let me tell you how impressive this is. Versus man coverage, his success rate was 94th percentile. Versus press, it was 96th percentile. That is elite territory. That's up there with some of the best route runners like Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson. That is just, really, really good stuff versus man and press coverage. And against zone, so he's a little bit weaker, but he's still above average with a 62nd percentile versus zone. So he has every single piece that you want to see from a superstar wide receiver. And I know the situation's a little crowded with the wide receiver room, but the long-term situation is really, really good. He has C.J. Stroud, one of the best young quarterbacks in the league. And what I love about him particularly is C.J. Stroud, he's not taking those red zone touchdowns with his legs. And I think that really, really helps the ceiling for a wide receiver because A.J. Brown, it might be hard for him to finish, as wide receiver one because Jalen Hurts is going to take so many touchdowns when they get, those inside the 5. So I just love Nico Collins he is priced fairly high. I just want to instill confidence in you guys that he's one of the best wide receivers in the league.
I mean, I'm not buying this guy. I haven't tried to get him back from you in any of our leagues recently, have I, JP?
No, you definitely didn't sniff around again, seeing if you could get him back.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago before the rookie draft in one of our leagues, I moved him for the 109 straight up. For me, the reason I was moving him then was just the flexibility of the pick. I don't regret the trade because I was able to move the pick for Amari Cooper and still get Jonathan Brooks in the rookie draft, and I could use the young RB help. The reason that I did move him at the time was he didn't have that contract. He was a potential just 1-year guy, and I was worried if he didn't have C.J. Stroud throwing to him. I'm not really sure what that's going to look like. He had an okay profile his first couple of years. C.J. Stroud comes in, and it was wheels up. So as soon as he got that contract extension, I mean, we all know Stephon Diggs is pretty much out of there after this year. It seems I can't imagine he sticks around another year. He doesn't seem like a type of guy who's going to take less money to stay. So then it's Nico and Tank Dell. They'll probably take another rookie wide receiver next year if they don't grow somebody from who they have right now. I'm not worried about a rookie wide receiver. I think it's wheels up. I think at his price, which is looking like it's somewhere between like 13 and 16 or so in like most rankings post this. Sometimes it's a lot lower than that, but I'm okay with buying at that 13th to 16th rank. And if you can still somehow get someone to sell to you for less than that, I'm very happy to buy him. I think he's easily worth a first and a second. I think he's easily worth like a Xavier Legette, Ricky Pearsall type of guy and a first that you expect to be late next year. Make sure that you're sure that it's late. I wouldn't probably want to trade my first in that deal, but if you have extra firsts lying around that are late, I think he's a great buy, JP. He's a guy that I've inquired on in several leagues recently, including from you. I haven't been able to get any shares, so that means it's startup time, baby. You can't trade for them. Start a new startup.
All right, Justin, tell us about your wide receiver that you are buying or selling here.
Yeah, so my first buy is George Pickens for a lot of different reasons. So I don't know if you guys knew this, but Kenny Pickett was not good at football. This is just kind of crazy, but when you have somebody even average, even just mediocre throwing you the football and they're not bad, it's better than someone bad throwing the football. So Pickett had 13 career touchdowns. And per StatMuse, out of those 13, Pickens actually caught 8 of those. That's a huge percentage of the total touchdowns, but he threw 6.5 touchdowns a year. Last year, Cortland Sutton had 10 touchdowns from Russ. So this is a guy who can actually throw touchdowns. In Russ Wilson, I'm very interested in seeing just how high the touchdown ceiling is for this big play wide receiver out of Pittsburgh in George Pickens. Year 1, 51 for 801 and 4. Year 2, 63 for 1140 and 5. So even though the touchdowns were not really there, I think that's a product of the quarterback play. I think that's pretty easy to say. He had a nice upward trajectory in yardage total, though, and you love to see that, as well as increased receptions. Obviously, Deontay is gone, which opens up some target share. Arthur Smith's stink is very real, but Pickens is a monster. He's not going to necessarily be a target monster. He's a yardage monster, a big play, yak, air yard guy. And I think the fact that he's a guy that isn't going to need a huge passing volume to be an efficient wide receiver is really nice to see. Russ loves to throw outside. This is something that a lot of people say is just because he's short, it's hard for him to see over the middle. So he's a guy who historically likes those boundary wide receivers, doesn't throw over the middle a lot. Now, I will acknowledge for a few warts in his profile. Last year, 4 for 195 and 2 in a single game really strengthens his year. But when somebody's years are buoyed by a huge game, I try not to hold that against them because I like guys that can single-handedly win me a week. As long as they didn't just do nothing the rest of the year, right? I am okay with that. I like that volatility, especially as a low-end flex play. If he's not my wide receiver 1, 2, especially if he's like a flex play, I'm excited to have a guy that can win me a week. He does have some potential concerns with separation. He is per reception perception 17th percentile versus zone, only 50th percentile versus man, but 71st versus press. So okay against press coverage, average against man, bad against zone. What this paints as a picture for me is a guy that unless he really improves, is not going to be getting open all of the time to be like a huge 150, 160 target type of guy, more likely than not. However, for what it's worth, he's not a guy that necessarily needs to do that. I think on 115 to 120 targets, you can expect him to have, based on his, he's about a 60% catch rate type of guy last year. You can expect him to have 65, 70 receptions this year, hopefully. And he is a huge ADOT, huge air yards guy. So on that, I think it's pretty safe to say you can expect about the same yardage total or a little bit of an improvement. So if he can get to that 10 touchdowns Cortland Sutton had last year, he can still be around that 1,100, 1,200 yard mark that he was at last year. He is a wide receiver 2 that you are currently able to get for wide receiver 3 prices, and he's young. I think he's an exciting buy. He's a guy that I'm trying to buy. If I'm trying to buy him from you and listen to this, though, he's not any good. You should sell me him. But anyone else, I am willing to pay a late first for this guy. Again, we have a video on how to actually evaluate league dynamics, how to evaluate 25 firsts. We'll link that in the description below. Make sure it's a late first. I don't want to pay a early first for this guy or even a mid first necessarily because there's a chance he doesn't hit, but that late first price I'm comfortable with.
If you tell me there's a wide receiver that probably isn't going to be volume hog, then yeah, I want it to be a guy who, does win down the field, can have those big touchdown seasons, and he checks those boxes. And where he's priced right now in Keep Trade Cut, he's wide receiver 26. He's right in between JSN and Brian Thomas Jr. So, yeah, he's at a pretty good price point there. He's 23.2 years old, and he's the clear-cut number 1 wide receiver on that team. I'm not a really big Roman Wilson guy, and outside of that, they don't really have jack squat. So, yeah, I think even though it's going to be probably a lower passing volume offense, I do think his market share will be high, and he will still have those big plays.
Yeah, definitely a guy that I'm high on. Unfortunately, we can't be high on everyone. Who is the first player you are
Coming
selling
off
here,
of a pretty
JP?
solid. This might make some people sad. Being small in the NFL, Jordan Addison, not a huge issue in today's NFL. But Jordan Addison, his size just shows up so much more than a lot of other small wide receivers. Not only is he very light at 170 pounds, but he isn't long either. His catch rate is his 31st percentile. As a contested catch guy, he doesn't really do a whole lot there. I mean, as evidenced by his size, he just gets out muscled a lot. Even against press coverage too, on reception perception, his press coverage success rate was 12th percentile. So he was just getting jammed and just pushed around. I mean, Devonta Smith, he is somebody who's right around that 170 pounds, but he's still great against press. But yeah, so that's what I'm saying is Addison, the size really does show up. And if you're going to be small, then I mean, you got to be a really great route runner or high end athlete, in my opinion. If it's going to be a guy who's a top 25 dynasty wide receiver, but he's right around average against zone, and he's 29th percentile versus man success rate using reception perception data again. So he's really not a really great route runner. He's solid. If a guy's not that great of an athlete, he's not big, and he's just a solid route runner, it does worry me. And to bring up the athleticism, he's a 19th percentile speed score. I mean, he's there with Justin Jefferson. He's never going to be the wide receiver one there. Justin Jefferson's going to be there for at least the next 5 years, and Addison's going to be there for the next 3, probably 4 if they pick up his 5th-year option. And they also have T.J. Hockenson in there as well, who's one of the best receiving tight ends in the league. Even right now, I like J.J. McCarthy. I'm hoping that he does some great things, but we can't guarantee that he's going to hit. And even if he does, he doesn't really profile. At least coming out of college, things could change, but he doesn't profile as a really high volume, high flying, passing offense that relies on his arm like Patrick Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers of old. So yeah, that's what concerns me. Is I don't think that the ceiling is all that high. I think he's solid as a guy who might be a low end wide receiver too. Maybe not this year with McCarthy as a rookie, but I just don't like his price point right now. So he's my biggest sell right now at his cost.
I've got to push back on you a little bit on this one. I think that when you have a guy with his body type and you have a coaching scheme that I think is going to be smart enough to try to utilize him pretty well, I don't expect there to be much of an issue with press coverage with him simply because you gave me the reason. JJ is there for the next 5+ years. He's going to be the guy who's on the line of scrimmage as the X receiver, and he's going to take away a lot of that coverage. You're never going to be able to double cover Addison. I think it opens up a lot of the field for him. I think the fact that they have him, they have Hockenson there, is going to open it up in general. I do have to admit that the situation there with the quarterback play probably limits his upside this year. I have no shares. I sold all of them last year because I kind of viewed him as an asset I expected to perform well year one with Cousins and maybe struggle after that because I kind of thought Cousins could leave. I think where he's priced right now, though, in that wide receiver 25-ish range kind of is about where he's sitting in keep trade cut. That's where we have him in our rankings, is in that not a wide receiver 2, but fringe wide receiver 3 ranking. I think it's kind of pick your poison at that point. But what I like about him over rookies is we've seen him have a decent season in the NFL. Every year, there are rookies who we are excited about. There's possibility for them, but we don't know what they can do in the NFL. We don't know if they can translate. We've seen him have a successful season. Was he exceptional? No. Is he in a good situation as far as quarterback play goes? Also, no. However, a lot of the warts on his profile as far as the ability to be that alpha type of guy, I think Justin Jefferson actually really is going to help him just play Robin throughout his career. I think if you can get him for a late first for 2 seconds, I would take him probably over a lot of the late first wide receivers this year. I'm not taking him over Xavier Worthy, but I could understand taking him over a Brian Thomas Jr., over Keon Coleman, Ladd McConkey, just depending on what you need, because I think he's going to be just a Robin type of guy. I think he's going to be a T. Higgins, Devonta Smith type of value. I don't think he's ever going to be better than a low-end wide receiver too. But there's a place for that on your dynasty roster. I think there's a lot of risk that we're always taking trying to get these high upside guys. So don't sell him unless you're getting, I'd sell him for a 25 first. But I would also sell Brian Thomas Jr., Ladd McConkey for a 25 first. Just don't sell him just to sell him is kind of what I'm saying. but absolutely at 25 first, he's off my roster in a heartbeat.
I mean, George Pickens is behind him. I'd take Pickens. Higgins is one spot ahead of him. I'd much rather have Higgins. I'll take Ladd and JSN and Rashi Rice. Those guys, they're all behind him as well. I think you just differ a little bit, but yeah, I'm not selling him for just anything. Of course, I have him at wide receiver 32 actually, and he's 25 on Keep Trade Cut, or 24.
Yeah, 24 on Keep Trade Cut does seem a little high, but everyone behind there has warts too. My next wide receiver that I'm going to talk about, guy that I've been seesawing back and forth. Immediately after the draft, my reaction was selling Rome Odunze. David kind of talked me off the ledge there that it's not necessarily the end of the world, the landing spot. And my argument here is kind of mostly vibes. There is a little statistical analysis here. So as far as his college production, he was a fourth-year breakout. He didn't break out as young as we want them to. Of course, there's context, COVID, etc. did make it harder for people, kind of a missed year. We talk about that in a lot of our off-season content. He has a lot of competition in Chicago, though, and that's really the big thing for me is, and we're not the first ones to say JSN type of potential value arc, right? This is nothing new. You've heard this if you listen to other podcasts, other content creators. I think it's just a cost benefit thing. I can see a world where he performs year one. I think there's a range of outcomes where that happens, but I think the most likely thing is that he does not perform that well year one. We're all saying right now, oh, it's fine. We're not going to overreact if he doesn't produce year one. We're not going to lower him that much because he's got a young quarterback, etc. And the young quarterback is something JSN did not have. I will admit that. However, last year we all said, we're not going to lower JSN. He's probably not going to do super well year one. We understand he has a lot of target competition. We still lowered him so much because we are so impatient. So for me, well, I still think he has a decent chance of panning out long term. My position is selling him right now. He is ranked around Tyreek, Nico Collins, Ayuk, Olave, and Devonta Smith. On a competing roster, I would pivot to any of those guys. I'd see if I could get a plus because I think you might be able to on a couple of those guys, but I'd be willing to do so without it if I'm competing. And if I'm not competing, I still prefer everyone straight up besides Tyreek and Devonta. And I think even Smith is kind of a conversation for me. So I want to acknowledge not everybody can just go ahead and say, like, I will just trade him where I have him and try to pivot and then just try to buy him later on. Because not everyone has as many leagues as I'm in. And sometimes you want to have him on maybe like a certain team. Maybe you want to call your shot. I don't personally care if I sell him in the shares that I have right now, and then I can't get him back in those leagues. I know that there's other leagues where I have lots of assets where I'm rebuilding in, where I could try to get him, and I just won't have him in my competing teams. So I kind of play that sort of like portfolio approach where I'll try to buy him back in a different league. If you want to say, I believe in this guy, I want to have him on my one or two dynasty teams that I have, call your shot, get your guy. I respect that. But personally, just at the price, I'm selling now and trying to buy if I can in the season or the off season.
I definitely understand that perspective. If you weren't biggest Rome Odunze fan, I mean, you know, anybody who's listened to our prospects videos, I love Rome Odunze a ton. But yeah, I mean, the difference between JSN and Odunze for me is just that I think Odunze does a lot better in the red zone and down the field. So I think he'll have those big plays that really get us excited. And he was a top 10 draft pick. You know, JSN wasn't. So I do think there's some differences there. Caleb Williams is more exciting. And Keenan Allen, he's going to be 33 next year. So I do think that they move on from Keenan Allen. Like we said that with Tyler Lockett. But Tyler Lockett's been there for so long. They love him there. And he's not as old as Keenan Allen. So in a rebuild, I'm holding Odunze. But in a contending roster, I definitely agree. At that cost, I'm going to look to move him for production for sure.
Yeah, I definitely understand the reasons you like him too. You definitely talk about that reception perception profile Rome had in college, that first all green route tree. That's why I said I'm interested in buying him later when I think the price might go down. So that being said, we are going to give you a little bit more buy and sell. And JP, who is your first lightning buy?
Yeah, so this is going to be our quick section here. I am going to buy Ladd McConkey. I think he's far and away the best wide receiver on the Chargers, best route runner. He's a great yak threat, and he's really explosive. He ran in the 4.3s. He's a super twitchy athlete as well. Justin Herbert, that's his quarterback for the next 4, 5+ years. He's one of the best young passing quarterbacks in the league. He has shown that he can support strong wide receiver production. And Keenan Allen, he had great. I mean, he had injuries, but he had top 10 wide receiver per game numbers in multiple seasons with Justin Herbert. Quentin Johnston, dude, he is a straight disaster. He is bad. I mean, the reception perception data came out on him, and he has a first percentile success rate versus man, first versus zone, and second versus press. That is not good. Not first as in good. That's like the worst, the bottom of the barrel. Yeah, so I just think that he's going to easily jump Quentin Johnston. I don't think Josh Palmer he's a solid wide receiver, but he's not the kind of guy who's going to draw a ton of volume. But I just think Ladd McConkey could finish as a top 20 wide receiver this year. And if he does that, I mean, he's going to soar in value. I think there's a chance that he has a better rookie season than Malik Neighbors just based on the situation.
So to give a little actionable advice real quick, would you trade a 25 first you project to be a playoff team's first for Ladd?
I don't think I will. I mean, if it's one of those teams that it's like a super team, that first, like your team in Megalo Dynasty is really good. I expect it to be in the championship. Yeah. Anyways, I probably would trade it for Ladd because I think his value will go up. But just based on like the prospect profile and where his value's at, I mean, I don't know if I would trade it first. That's pretty close though.
Yeah, you'd have to be certain that's a guaranteed playoff buy team to even consider it. I don't think the process is great trading a first, but I do think if you can get him at a cheaper valuation than a first, he is a nice buy as well. My first buy, Amari Cooper, coming off a career year. Of course, there's concerns. He doesn't have Joe Flacco, the best quarterback in the league, throwing to him anymore. I think you can get him for a second and a third potentially. I just inquire what you can buy him for. If I can get him for a second and a third that I project to be mid, I'm very happy to do that if I'm competing. I think he's a guy with low-end wide receiver, one upside, a pretty safe kind of wide receiver, two sort of floor. I love him as a flex play because of that boom-bust ability. Same argument I made for Pickens. Give me a guy who can put up week winning numbers. I don't mind boom-bust. I don't mind if they're propelled by a huge boom game or two, as long as they still show up the rest of the season and are a guy that can still not kill me in most other weeks. All wide receivers are a little bit inconsistent. And who is your first sell, JP?
I got to go with Tank Dell here. He is wide receiver 20 on Keep Trade Cut right now. He's my wide receiver 25 in my dynasty rankings. I mean, he had a great rookie season. He definitely did, but he did it as a 24-year-old. He turned 24 in the middle of his run. I'm just not sure if I can count on him as a contender. I mean, I think that he's going to be the third target behind Nico and Stephon Diggs. Clearly, I just laid out the pros for Nico Collins. So I just think that Nico Collins is the much better wide receiver long term. I just think that Tank Dell's ceiling is capped. He is really small. I mean, we saw him get injured. Maybe it's because of that size. I don't know. But he doesn't break many tackles either at that size. His 40th percentile versus zone worries me a little bit. The other marks were pretty solid versus man and press. But I just think Tank Dell at wide receiver 20, it's a little too high for me just based on where I see his long-term ceiling and also what I'm going to be expecting for him this year.
Yeah, I mean, he had a really good year one. I don't know. He's in that Devin Achane size problem for me that I just can't value these guys as well as they produced. I don't know why. I've acknowledged this is just a blind spot. I'm on the same board. I would take any 25 first for him. Is that kind of the same process for you? You're looking to get a 25 first or a player that you think is worth a 25 first for sure, like a similar wide receiver in a switch?
Yep, 100% agree. I mean, Zay Flowers is right behind him. I like him a little bit more, and DK Metcalf is right ahead of him. I like both of those guys a little bit more personally.
I would love switching him for DK Metcalf. Would be so excited. And my quick sell, Jaden Reed. A lot of people really like this guy. They think he's going to be the wide receiver one. It's possible that he is. I'm not a guy that thinks I'm right with player takes. I think that's a stupid crowded room. I think there's really smart people out there who know a lot more about football than I do, and they prognosticate it's going to be him. Maybe it's going to be Wicks, maybe Christian Watson, because he's like that unique speed gazelle type of guy. And if he fixes his hamstrings, there's just too much going on. I want to sell all of these wide receivers, but especially Reed because he's the most valuable. Now, I want to say I am only looking to sell him for a first or for a player who I know is worth a first. Players that I know are worth a first, I'm going to talk about like where that line is in our tier wide receiver video. So if it's a guy that I don't think is worth a first, I might hold Reed just for the upside. I'm looking to pivot to rookie wide receivers like Ladd, BTJ, Worthy in a heartbeat for this guy. Obviously, anybody in the top 3 above that as well, no doubt. I just think when you look at the playoff production where he had 0 yards against Dallas, that is always an outcome because of how many weapons there are in the passing game that he could just disappear like that. He could also end up being the wide receiver 1 and be great. That is a potential outcome, but I would just rather bet that he is not if I can get the cash price of a first round pick or a rookie first round wide receiver from this year for him.
I think Jaden Reed's very talented. I really like him, but I think betting on the range of outcomes being so wide and selling him in that scenario, I definitely understand that perspective, and I don't disagree, even though I do like the player.
Yeah, we try to take our player takes out when we can. Of course, we are human, so sometimes we do make player take based decisions. Happens to the best of us, besides, of course, David, who is perfect. So, from all of us here at the Dino Construction Podcast, we hope this was as useful for you as it was for us. Please make sure to like and subscribe wherever you listen or view. And from all of us here at Dino Construction, until next time.